Hello, I'm Anika from Made to Sew. In this class, we're going to be looking at how to draft a V-neck A-line dress. The dress that I've designed here is sleeveless and it has a loose lining with inseam pockets. This is the first class of a new series where I'm going to be showing you how to draft and then how to sew this garment. You can make a long version or a short version, and you can choose to add sleeves if you want to. For this drafting class, you're going to need to have a starting point. Ideally, this would be a bodice block that fits your individual figure. Alternatively, it can be a basic pattern, such as my Copen pattern, which I'll pop a link to here. So grab your starting point and we can begin. I'm going to be working with my bodice block in half scale. As we work through the drafting process, I will be telling you the measurements that I used in metric and imperial for the full scale draft. So ignore the measurements you see on my ruler. My bodice block has 4 centimeters or 1.5 inches of ease in the bust, waist and hip. Please consider this if your pattern has a different amount of ease. Now I realise that your pattern or bodice block might look a little bit different to mine. So as we go through the drafting process, I will mention any differences or things that you might need to consider. We're going to start working on the front pattern, and we're going to begin by manipulating our darts or moving our darts into the final location. It doesn't really matter where the darts are at the moment, we can move them to where we want them. My bodice block has a large dart in the center of the shoulder. Yours may have a large dart at the corner of the neckline, as a side dart, or perhaps as a waist dart. It doesn't really matter where the darts are currently positioned. We can use dart manipulation to move them to the location we want them on the pattern. For this garment, we're going to want a dart in the side seam. I positioned this dart 8 centimeters, 3 inches down from the underarm. You can position your side seam dart wherever you want it. Connect this mark to the bust apex. Cut along the drawn line from the side seam to the bust apex of where you want your dart to be. Cut along the dart leg of the dart that you want to close. For my pattern, it's the shoulder dart. Leaving a small amount of paper attached at the bust apex, 2 to 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch. This will allow you to close the dart you no longer want and to open up the dart location that you do want. In your pattern, you might be closing the dart at the edge of the neckline, at the waist, or you might be moving a side seam dart to a new location. The same rules apply. Fix the closed dart in place with some tape. True any discrepancy from closing the dart. So in terms of the darts that you want or do not want, generally speaking, if you have a dart in the shoulder or at the neckline edge here, you're going to want to close that completely for this style of garment. You want your shoulder here to be the precise width of your shoulder and no larger. If you have a large dart in the waist and perhaps your pattern ends at the waist, then you can close the majority of that dart. My waist dart here measures approximately 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters. So you are welcome to leave a small amount remaining if you want to. This will just give us extra ease across the waist of the garment because we won't be using the waist dart in this style of garment. Because this garment is sleeveless, we may want to consider removing a dart in the front armhole to prevent any gaping in that area. Whether you will have an issue with this depends slightly on the pattern or the block that you're using and your individual figure. I know that this will work best for me, so I will add a dart to my pattern. I usually position this around the front armhole notch. If using this technique, you can cut down one of the dart legs for the armhole dart and also manipulate this into the side dart. If you're uncertain if you will need a dart in this area, you can always make a sample of this garment and see if you require it in the sample. Moving on to the neckline, we're going to begin by removing 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch, from the high shoulder point, connecting back to the end of the shoulder. This helps to prevent gaping on a low neckline. Decide on the shoulder width. In my garment, I measured 2.5 centimeters, 1 inch from the high shoulder point, and the same distance, 2.5 centimeters, 1 inch from the end of shoulder. This left me with a finish shoulder of approximately 6 centimeters, 2 inches and 3/8. This size will change depending on your shoulder size. Decide on how deep you want the base of the neckline to be. I positioned mine in line with my bust apex. Use your French curve to connect your shoulder point to the base of your neckline. Using a very soft, shallow curve is generally more flattering
and fits the body better than a straight line. In order to achieve a good fit with a low neckline like this, we're probably going to need to remove a dart from the neckline as well. The amount of dart that you need to take can vary from figure to figure and generally increases if you have a fuller bust. You can follow these steps to give yourself a good starting point. Further adjustments can be made after fitting a sample. Firstly, take a measurement on your body wearing the bra that you plan to wear with this garment. Measure from the bust apex down to the underbust or rib cage with a tape measure. Take this measurement and use it as a radius, plotting this figure in a circle around the bust apex. As a general rule, if the base of your neckline is lower than the top of your bust circle, you may need to remove a dart from the neckline. As a starting point, position the top dart leg in line with the top edge of your bust circle. Connect to the bust apex. For the size of the dart, these figures can be a good starting point for a low neckline. For an A cup, take 1 centimeter 3/8 of an inch. For a B cup, take 1.5 centimeters 5/8 of an inch. For a C cup plus, take 2 centimeters 3/4 of an inch. However, if the base of your neckline is a lot lower than the top of your bust radius, you may need to increase these figures. For an approximate rule, increase the dart width by 3 millimeters 1/8 of an inch for every 4 centimeters 1.5 inches distance between the top of the bust radius and the base of the neckline. My neckline dart measured 2.3 centimeters, 7/8 of an inch, and this worked perfectly for me. I did not need to make any adjustments in my sample. Use dart manipulation to remove the dart in the neckline and send this to the side dart. You will then need to redraw the neckline using your French curve to clear up any discrepancies. I chose to lower the armhole by 1 centimeter 3/8 of an inch. Square this off the side seam for approximately 1 centimeter 3/8 of an inch. You can then draw in the armhole from the end of the shoulder to the underarm. The height of the underarm is totally up to you and what will work best for your garment. I would make sure that both the shoulder and the underarm covers the bra you're planning to wear with this garment. Now that we have the neckline and the armhole finalized, we can move down the garment to add the length that we require and the A-line shape. You will need to decide on the length that works best for your individual shape and size. To give you an example, with my patterns, my short dress measured 42 centimeters, 16.5 inches from the waist. My long dress measures 82 centimeters, 33 inches from the waist. For reference, my height is 170 centimeters, 5 foot 7 inches. Extend the center front line of the pattern to your desired length. Square across at the hem of the pattern to the same width as the low hip. Connect the hem to the low hip at the side seam. If you don't have a low hip on your pattern, perhaps your pattern ends at the waistline, you can follow these steps for extending it. Extend your center front line down from the waist. You can take a measurement on the side of your body from waist to low hip, or you can use an average measurement, which is approximately 8 inches 20 centimeters. On a right angle to the center front line, draw your low hip. Measure your individual low hip and add the ease for the pattern that you're working with. For my pattern, it would be adding 4 centimeters 1.5 inches. Divide this measurement by 4 as we're working with 1/4 of the body. For my pattern, I would make the front larger than the back. I would add 5 millimeters 1/4 of an inch to the low hip measurement for the front of the garment and remove that amount from the low hip measurement for the back. Connect to the waistline at the side seam. Once you've extended your pattern to the length that you desire, we can then work to add the A-line shape. Find the center of the garment hem. Connect this to the bottom of the waist dart, which finishes on the high hip. If you don't have a waist dart or the high hip on your garment, you can still connect to this point. For an approximate placement, the high hip can be positioned halfway between the waist and the low hip. The center line of the dart can be extended down from the bust apex, parallel to the center front. To create the A-line shape, cuts from the hem up to the base of the waist dart. Then, cuts from the side seam along the high hip, leaving 1/8 of an inch to 3 millimeters of paper connected at the base of the waist dart. This is your pivot point. You will then be able to open up the line at the hem of the garment to add in your insertion or A-line shape. By opening up the hem of the garment, you will lose some of the length on the side seam at the high hip area. We will need to account for this when drawing out the side seam. Decide on how much volume you want to add into your insertion to create your A-line shape. For the short dress, I added 4 centimeters, 1.5 inches. For the long dress, I added 14 centimeters, 5.5 inches. Pivot the pattern until you have the desired amount. If you want to add a lot of volume, you can distribute this more evenly by having 2 insertion points. One can be placed beneath the dart. The second can be halfway between the dart and the side seam. Whatever you choose to add into your insertion, you need to add half of this to the side seam as an extension. So for my short dress, this would be 2 centimeters, 3/4 of an inch. For my long dress, this was 7 centimeters, 2 3/4 inches. Once you're happy with your A-line, you can tape everything in place and fill in the gap with a piece of paper. The next step is to move on to the side seam. I need a little bit of extra paper here, so I'm going to add that now. I'm going to close my dart so that I can draw this in place, because I drew from the underarm directly down to the hem of the garment, hitting the mark for the extension. If you want to keep more shape in the garment, you can of course join this up to the waist instead, and use a French curve to curve over the waist area. At the underarm, you can choose to add or remove ease to get the fit that you like in this area. I'm working off my block with the 4 centimeters, 1.5 inches of ease included. Now when it comes to the length of this side seam, we do need to add on what we've lost at that high hip because of the A-line insertion. Measure the amount of paper that's folded over at the high hip area. This amount needs to be added to the side seam hem. However, we also want to make an adjustment here. Generally speaking, A-line garments have more of an angle to their side seam that can incorporate the bias of the fabric. This can lead to a side seam stretching and being longer than the centre front or centre back when the garment is finished. To prevent this issue, we're going to make the side seam slightly shorter. In a garment like this, where we haven't added in too much shaping for an A-line, we only need to remove a small amount. I'm going with 5 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch. For a longer garment, or where we've included a large amount of A-line shaping, we will probably want to remove more. For the long dress, I removed 1 centimeter, 3/8 of an inch. So to calculate your side seam, you will need to add back on the amount that you've lost at the high hip and then remove this 5 millimeter, 1/4 of an inch, or the adjustment that you've chosen for your side seam. Once marked, you can then use your French curve to curve in the hem. Make sure that the hem is nice and flat at the centre front and centre back. Connect your side seam from the hem all the way up to the underarm. We will add some paper behind the dart and true this shortly. Now we've done the drafting that we need here to create our master pattern. We're now going to add some other details onto the pattern that we can trace off to create separate pattern pieces. Let's start with the hem band. Measure up 7 centimeters or 3 inches, following the curved shape of the hem. I'm going to mark this on in a different color so that it stands out for you. This is a pattern piece that will be sewn on to the inside hem of the garment to give us a nice finish in this area. Next, we're going to add a side seam pocket. I'm going to position my pocket 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters down from the waist, along the side seam. Generally speaking, the top of the pocket can sit 1 to 4 inches, 2.5 to 10 centimeters down from the waist. The opening of my pocket is 17 centimeters, 6.5 inches. Mark notches on your pattern to record the opening for the pocket. Draw the pocket to your desired shape. As a general rule, you want to keep this as a nice soft curve shape, and you need to make sure that it's large enough to position your hand inside. We're now going to true the dart. Position some paper behind the darts to fill it in. Use a tracing wheel to score both of the dart legs. This will make it easier to fold the dart into position. Check that both of the dart legs measure the same amount. If they don't, adjust your side seam accordingly. Once correct, you can fold the dart into position, with the dart bulk going down towards the hem of the garment. Score the side seam line using your tracing wheel. Once you open up your dart, you should be able to draw in the scored markings. This will be easier if you're working with a thinner pattern drafting paper compared to the thick printer paper that I've used. Now you're probably going to want to back away the dart from the bust apex. The average amount would be 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters. To do this, you need to find the center of the dart. Measure between the dart legs, draw a central line from the bust apex to the true dart at the side seam. Back away the dart from the bust apex by your required amount. I'm keeping my dart quite close to the apex because that's what worked best for me. 1.5 centimeters, 5/8 of an inch away. Connect from the dart point to the dart legs at the side seam. If your dart bulk, so the center of your dart, is larger than 5 centimeters or 2 inches, you may want to turn it into a cutaway dart instead. Measure your seam allowance minus 1 centimeter, 3/8 of an inch from each of the dart legs. The central portion of the dart will be removed. Now it's time to add grain lines to our pattern, and there are a few options with this garment. The first option is to have your grain line parallel to your centre front. You can cut the garment with a seam at the centre front, or you can choose to cut it on the fold. Another option is to cut this garment on the bias, a 45-degree angle to the centre front. I would recommend adding a seam to the centre front for this option. The grain line for the pocket pattern piece will be parallel to the side seam. The hemband can be cut on fold parallel to the centre front. Keep this the same whether you cut your exterior on the straight of grain or bias, and whether you have a seam at the centre front or not. Finally, to this master pattern, we're going to add some details for our lining. The first thing that we need to do for our lining pattern is to add a little bit more ease to the side seam. I'm going to increase the side seam by 3mm or 1/8 of an inch. The lining should also be shorter than the exterior garment. Measure up 4 centimetres, 1.5 inches from the garment hem to mark the lining hem edge. Finally, you may want to make your lining a little bit smaller around the armhole and the neckline, removing a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch, 2 to 3 millimetres for favouring. I have marked all of my lining adjustments in green. Moving on, we can work to draft the back pattern. Let's start at the neckline. You want to position the same measurement that you used on the front pattern from the high point shoulder. For my pattern, this was 2.5 centimetres, 1 inch. On this block, there is a dart in the back shoulder. We're not going to use it in this pattern, and it's going to be removed off the end of shoulder. To ensure the front and the back pattern have the same shoulder width, you can fold under the front pattern at the shoulder seam and match this to the back pattern, aligning the adjusted point at the high point shoulder. Copy the front shoulder width onto the back pattern. Use a French curve to draw in the back neckline. Make sure the neckline stays nice and flat at the centre back edge. Check the adjustment that you made to the front underarm. I lowered the front underarm by 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. I need to do the same to the back pattern. Curve in the back armhole using your French curve. Take the front pattern and connect the front and the back patterns together at the shoulder seam again. Check that you have a smooth transition at the neckline and armhole edge. You can also check that you have a smooth transition at the underarm. Once you're happy, you can finalise the back armhole shape. The shoulder dart is not in use. Now that we've completed the neck and the armhole for the back pattern, we're going to move down the body to add the length. Let's add some extra paper at the bottom of the pattern. Just like with the front pattern, you're going to want to extend your centre back seam. Add the same length from the waist that you added to the front pattern. My short dress was 42 centimetres, 16.5 inches. My long dress measures 82 centimetres, 33 inches from the waist. Square across the hem, the same distance as the low hip on the back pattern, and connect up to the side seam. Just like with the front pattern, we're going to find the centre of the hem at the back pattern. We're then going to connect this to where the dart meets the low hip. If you don't have a dart in your pattern, find the centre of the waist, extend this to the high hip parallel to the centre back. Cut from the hem up to the high hip. Then, from the side seam, cut along the high hip line. Leave 1/8 of an inch to 3 millimetres of paper attached as a pivot point. Just like with the front pattern, you're then going to open up the hem to add in your A-line shape, closing and removing an amount on the high hip. You want to add in the same amount in your insertion that you did in the front of the pattern. Mine for the short dress was 4 centimetres, 1.5 inches. For the long dress, it was 14 centimetres, 5.5 inches. Add in a piece of paper behind your opening and secure your work with some tape. You're going to want to add the same extension as you did in the front as well, which is going to be half of the insertion. For the short dress, mine was 2 centimetres, 3/4 of an inch. For the long dress, mine was 7 centimetres, 2 3/4 inches. Now we're going to need to draw the side seam on, and I'm going to add some extra paper to the side seam here because I'm going to need it. Now we want the front and the back side seams to be pretty much the same shape, so we're going to copy the front onto the back. For the front pattern, this is easiest if you close the dart. Position the front pattern onto the back pattern, aligning the underarm. If you adjusted the ease at the underarm in the front, you need to do the same for the back. And the hem and the markings for your extension. It is slightly harder for me to see through this paper because I'm working with a thicker printer paper. If you're working with a thinner pattern drafting paper, this will be nice and easy. Once you're happy that you've aligned the side seams, you can then use your tracing wheel to record the front side seam onto the back, as well as the hem length at the side seam. Once you remove your pattern, you should be able to see a serrated line created by the tracing wheel that you can record with your pencil. I've got the side seam and I've also got the correct hem, so that the side seam between the front and the back will match perfectly. Once the hem is recorded on the back, you can use your French curve to connect this to the centre back. Make sure that the hem is nice and flat at the centre back. Now we can also use the front pattern to mark the location of the pockets. We want to have notches on the back of the pattern that will align with the notches for the pockets on the front of the pattern. Position the front pattern onto the back pattern again, aligning the side seam, and record the notches using your tracing wheel. Mark the notches onto the pattern. Just like with the front pattern, you're going to want to add the other elements to this master pattern so that we can trace off the separate pattern pieces. The hemband needs to be marked on in the same way, measuring up 7 centimeters or 3 inches from the hem. I will mark the hemband in blue to differentiate it for you. You can cross out the waist dart in the center of the pattern, as this will not be used, as well as the shaping dart at my center back. I will be using a straight line for the center back of this pattern. We need to mark the lining hem 4 centimeters, 1.5 inches shorter than the exterior hem, just like we did for the front pattern. We can also remove the 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch, 2 to 3 millimeters for favouring at the neckline and armhole, and add the 1/8 3 millimeters of ease to the side seam. The green pen marks the changes for my lining. Finally, we need to add a notch for our zipper because this garment is going to have a centre back invisible zipper. I'm going to use an invisible zipper that measures 55 centimeters, approximately 21.5 inches. I'm going to position the notch for my zipper 50 centimeters, 19.75 inches down from the centre back neck. At a minimum, your notch should be 2 centimeters, 3/4 of an inch shorter than your zipper length. As this dress is quite loosely fitting, you would be able to get away with a shorter zip if you prefer. I'm also going to add a zipper notch for the lining, 2 centimeters, 3/4 of an inch below the exterior zipper notch. Finally, we can add our grain lines. Option 1 is a grain line that's parallel to the centre back. This is suitable for an invisible zipper at the centre back and the use of the shaped centre back seam. An alternative is to cut the centre back on the fold. This requires having a straight centre back line and moving the invisible zipper to the side seam. This will work as long as your front neckline is low enough to create a large enough neck opening for your head to go through. Alternatively, use the bias grain line, a 45-degree angle from the centre back, and I would recommend a centre back seam for this grain line. The grain line for the back hemband can be parallel to the centre back. This pattern piece can be cut on the fold. Before we move on to tracing out our pattern pieces, we can check the connection between the front and the back pattern at the side seam hem. Now that you have your final pattern, we can work to trace off the individual pattern pieces. Trace along the marked lines for either the exterior pattern, the pocket pattern, the hemband or the lining patterns. Add the grain lines and notches as required. You can then work to add your seam allowance. I would recommend adding a 1 centimeter 3/8 seam allowance in all locations. Once complete, you can cut out your patterns and label them. I would recommend labeling your pattern pieces with a name of the pattern. You might want to say what block or what pattern you used. The pattern piece, whether it's the front, the back, the front hemband, or the pocket, and how many pattern pieces you're planning to cut out. You're going to need to have a pattern piece for your front and your back. As discussed, these pattern pieces can be cut on the straight of grain, on the fold, or on the bias. Label them accordingly. You may also want to write that you need to cut these out in your exterior fabric. You will need to have a hemband for the front and a hemband for the back. Both of these are cut on fold. You will need to cut one in your fabric and one in a lightweight interfacing. The pockets should have 2 cut in fabric and 2 cut in lining. And then your lining pieces for your front and back should be cut on the same grain line as your exterior pattern pieces. You don't need to mark the notches for the pocket, but you do need to mark the notch on the back for the zipper.
Thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this class and that you learned some new pattern drafting techniques. Join me in the next class for sewing the dress.